Do you like sitting next to a warm fire while camping or in your backyard? I know I do. In this video, I'm going to go over how I modified this old stationary wood burning fire pit and made it into a portable propane burning fire pit that fits in a bag. So if you have an old fire pit like this at home, don't get rid of it. Stick around and maybe I can give you some ideas on how to bring new life into something you might consider junk. Don't go anywhere because we're getting started right now. What's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Matt. I'm just a dude, and if I can't fix it, I'll fix it so no one else can. What's that? You haven't subscribed to my channel yet? Be a lot cooler if you did. A quick disclaimer. I'm showing you how I built my portable fire pit. If you choose to do this on your own, you assume all risk and liability. If this isn't what you're looking for, here's a link to a video on a smokeless fire pit I did a little while ago. But let's get right into this build. Any parts I used to build this will be listed in the description below. The fire pit I'm using was originally purchased about 20 years ago. I was able to find a fire pit which closely resembles the one I have. It is a Landmann Copper Scroll Series fire pit. If you have a fire pit like this already, great. If you don't and wanted one, I would purchase a grab-and-go fire pit from Pleasant Hearth. The good things about this is it already has a collapsible base and a carry bag. Buying a pit already portable will save you time and money. A quick Google search will show you this fire pit can be purchased for under $100. I knew I wanted to convert this fire pit to propane. My family enjoys camping, but unfortunately, a lot of the places we go do not allow wood-burning fire pits anymore. I found all the parts needed to convert this fire pit to propane at easyfirepits.com. If you have no idea what you're doing, like me, they have a lot of information and tutorials on their site to help you through this. They offer a lot of things on the website to include replacement parts, burners, pans, and inserts, fire bowls, and kits where you can even have the fire on top of water. I ended up ordering a gas kit from them. They have 5 different kit options, so I'll quickly go over all the kits they offer. The CK kit is used to hook up a propane tank to a burner, which is kind of what I'm doing, but the flame level is controlled at the propane tank. I chose to purchase the CK Plus kit. This kit is almost exactly like the CK kit, but there's another key valve which controls the flame level. I like this feature because someone like a kid can walk up to a propane tank and adjust the flames to 3+ feet in height. They also sell an ITCK Plus kit for a table which has a propane tank stored inside of it. There is a K++ kit for hooking up to a gas line on a house so no propane tank is needed. And lastly, a DK kit for using the smaller 1-pound propane tanks. The ordering process was very simple. There are many add-ons and choices, but they are kept easy with drop-down menus for the items. I added a black key and cover plate to my kit. I decided to keep the standard 3-foot black propane hose and 12-foot black propane hose. The 3-foot line runs from the burner to the key valve, and the 12-foot line runs from the key valve to the propane tank. There are a ton of options for these to include different lengths up to 50 foot and stainless braided lines. If I were to do this again, I would buy the stainless lines. The next big choice is regulators. I went with the standard high pressure regulator. However, this regulator is able to make flames 3+ feet in height, which could be dangerous. There are 2 other regulator options. One to make flames around 2 feet in height and one that makes flames about 1 foot in height. The copper bowl on this fire pit is 30 inches in diameter, so I ordered an 18-inch double circle burner with my kit. This works great, but it does use some gas. If you wanted a more economical burner, I would order a smaller burner, probably the 12-inch circle burner. Now the propane burner parts are ordered, it's time to modify the old frame structure. As you can see, the legs are attached to a middle and top ring. I want the legs able to be spun up out of the way for storage. To do that, I first drilled the original center holes of the base and legs out with a 1/4-inch drill bit. Once all 4 holes in the middle of the legs and the middle ring were drilled out, I used these 1/4-inch by 3-inch black panhead screws to attach the legs to the middle ring. On the inside of the ring, I placed a number 12 compression spring, a black 1/4-inch washer, and a black nut on these screws. I only put 1 nut to secure the legs and spring to the middle ring and then adjusted the tightness on the spring. Once the compression spring was where I wanted it, I added another nut and tightened it up against the first nut. What this does is jams the nuts together and basically locks the nuts in place so they don't loosen up and come undone. I cut off the extra thread portion of the screw with a cutoff wheel on a grinder and then hit the sharp edges with the flapper disc. To lock these legs in place in the upright position, I used 4 1.5 inch long pieces of 1 inch by 3/16 of an inch thick flat bar for the bottom pieces and 1 inch by 1/8 inch thick flat bar for the top pieces. Again, I cut the pieces needed and then knocked off the sharp edges. To secure the upper ring in place, I'm going to use 1 inch by 1 inch by 1/8 inch thick angle iron. The top ring was able to fit in this angle iron almost perfectly. I cut 4 1 inch long pieces of this angle iron. Now all the pieces are cut and the burrs and sharp edges are removed, it's time to weld them in place. To add the leg stops, I positioned the legs 90 degrees from the middle ring. Then I placed a mark on the legs so I can make sure the legs were in the same location before welding them. You know that phrase, measure twice, cut once, or measure twice, weld once in this instance? Well, we're going to do that right now. Right before I weld the stops on the legs, I double check squareness with a combination square. I add the bottom piece of flat bar to the leg and secured it with the ground clamp from the welder. After all the bottom pieces were in place, I welded the angle iron onto the top of the legs. This will act as a clamp to hold the top ring on. As you can see, there are holes on the top of the legs. This is where the old screws went to secure the top ring to the legs. I placed the top ring over the holes and then added the pieces of angle iron. I used a pair of vice grip pliers to hold the angle iron in place while I welded the angle iron onto the legs. After all 4 pieces of angle iron were welded onto the top of the legs, I used a grinder with a cutoff wheel to cut off the excess angle iron. The copper bowl sits in this area, and if these little pieces were allowed to stay, the bowl would not sit inside of the top ring very well. At first, I wasn't going to add any pieces of flat bar to the upper portion of the legs, but the frame had a little more wiggle in it than I wanted. I don't think it would have fallen over, but I didn't want to take any chances of it falling over, because only you can prevent forest fires. I used a pair of needle nose vice grip pliers to hold the smaller pieces of flat bar in place so they could be welded. Once they were clamped in place, I used a pair of wire cutters to help set them in place and ensure they were tight against the middle ring to remove as much wobble as possible. I do have hammers, but the wire cutters were closer. Now it's time to convert this fire pit to propane. The first thing I had to do was to clean up this copper bowl because it had been sitting outside for a long time and looked very worn. The easiest way I found to do that was to use a wire wheel on a grinder. Now let's see what came in our package from easyfirepits.com. In it we have an 18-inch burner, 3-foot and 12-foot propane lines, regulators. I purchased a high pressure and a low pressure regulator. I want to see if this really does make 3-foot high flames, but that's for another video. Then there are our connection parts, key valve and instructions. I had to build something to secure the key valve to the frame. I marked off a piece of 3/16 inch thick steel plate I had laying around. I used the valve cover itself as a template to add the radius to the plate and the hole in the center for the key. I centered the hole on the plate and used a center punch to mark the hole. To drill out the hole, I used a 1-inch hole saw. After the hole was drilled out, I separated the piece I needed from the rest of the plate. Then I took that old flapper disc to the edge of this plate and removed any sharp edges. The best way I could think of to mount this piece to the middle ring and to have it still be removable was to screw it on with a hand knob. Ace Hardware didn't have the exact hand knob I wanted, so I made my own. I purchased a small hand knob from Ace and an all-thread 1/4-inch bolt. This was way cheaper than buying a piece of all-thread. I used permanent red Loctite on the portion of the bolt that will screw into the hand knob. This will permanently hold that piece of thread into the knob. Then I cut off the head of the bolt. I left 2 nuts on the thread of the bolt while doing this. These nuts not only gave me a place to hold the bolt while cutting the head off, but when you remove the nuts, they will clean up the thread as well. I rounded the sharp edges and considered this good enough for who it's for. After this custom hand knob was complete, I took a small piece of the plate I cut off and welded it to the top of the inside part of the valve plate. This will be what the valve plate uses to sit on the top of the middle ring of the base. I drilled a 1/4 inch hole in the middle of the control valve plate, about a 1/2 inch down from the piece I welded on. After the hole was drilled, I went back to the frame and centered the valve plate between 2 legs. I marked where the hole in the valve plate was to the middle ring, then drilled that hole out as well. I used a 5/16 inch drill bit for this hole. After the hole was drilled in the middle ring, I secured the valve plate to the middle ring with a hand knob and a nut. I then welded the nut onto the inside of the middle ring. Now I have a valve plate that can be removed from the frame and stored separately. Once the key valve plate was complete, it's time to install the burner. To set the burner in the copper plate, I first centered it. To do this, I placed the burner in the copper disc and used a tape measure to adjust the burner until it was more or less in the middle of the copper disc. We're not building rockets here, so I didn't spend a lot of time on this. I marked where the nipple will pass through the copper disc and attach to the burner. To drill this hole, I used 2 different step bits. The first allowed me to punch through the copper. The other bit allowed me to drill the hole the size needed to be able to pass the nipple through the copper bowl. After the hole was drilled, I added the flat threaded washer, which came with the kit, to one end of the nipple. I then attached the nipple to the burner and hand tightened it. You really don't need much more than this because you can strip out these parts pretty easily. I set the burner in the copper bowl and adjusted the washer until it was set to where the burner was against the bowl for stability. This is a fire pit that's going to get stored and moved around a lot. I wanted the burner up against the bowl to reduce as much movement as possible, so hopefully this thing doesn't break. Once the nipple was through the bowl, I added the other washer nut to the other side and tightened them down. These are pretty big washers, so I had to use this old pipe wrench I had to tighten them. I very carefully just snugged this washer because stripping out the washer could be done very easily with this wrench. You know when you tighten something down to the point it gets loose? Well, that's bad, so I tried to avoid it. Once the burner is set, it's time to add the 90-degree fitting to the other side of the nipple. This fitting will allow the propane hose to connect from the key valve to the burner. I added some blue PTFE thread tape that came with the kit. You don't have to add a lot of this. I only went around about 4 times. There is a proper way of putting this tape on though. You have to go around the threads like you are screwing something onto it. Going this way will keep the tape in place when something is screwed over the top of it. Once the tape was on, I threaded on the 90-degree fitting. I used a large crescent wrench to screw this together. Again, this isn't as tight as I can get it with this wrench. I just used enough force to feel some resistance on the wrench. Now it's time to add the 3-foot hose to the 90-degree fitting. You do not have to add any tape to the rest of the fittings. You can see the end of the fitting has a slope cut into it. The other fittings on the hoses have a corresponding cut on the end, and when they are screwed together, this is what makes the connections airtight. I used a large crescent wrench and an open end wrench to secure this hose fitting to the 90-degree fitting. Again, just snugged it up. I didn't make this as tight as I possibly could. Then I hooked the other end of the short hose to the key valve. Be sure to check the valve and figure out which end of the hose goes where. There are arrows on the valve that show how the propane is supposed to flow through it. Lastly, I connected the 12-foot hose to the key valve and then onto the regulator. A quick side note on this, I put this fire pit together and then had to take it almost all the way apart to adjust how the short hose ran into the key valve. The key valve was 180 degrees the wrong direction, so I had to adjust that to prevent from placing a kink in the short hose when the key valve would be screwed onto the frame under the copper bowl. I used a piece of 1-inch PVC as a spacer to give the proper spacing between the key valve plate and the valve. This took a little fine tuning to get it to sit how I wanted it. I used the grinder and a flapper disc with surgical precision to remove a little of the PVC pipe to get the key valve sitting exactly how I wanted it. Once I got the key valve in, I replaced the blue PTFE tape on the nipple and reattached the 90-degree fitting. All I have to do now is to reattach the hose going to the fitting, and it's time to try this thing out. Since this fire pit is 30 inches wide, I was able to find this heavy-duty wreath bag on Amazon. All the parts for the fire pit are able to store inside of this very nicely. The link for this is in the description below. Setup is a snap. Just take the frame out, set 3 legs into position. Add the top ring and then set the last leg and it locks everything into place. Add the copper bowl and put the hoses inside the frame. Secure the key valve onto the middle ring with the hand knob. Once the fire pit is put together, Just got to hook some propane up to it, and let's see how this works. There is a needle valve on the regulator. I keep this closed and open up the propane tank all the way. Then I crack the key valve on the fire pit open. I use the needle valve to control the amount of propane going to the fire pit. However, the key valve on the fire pit also limits the amount of propane going to the fire pit, so it works as kind of a fail-safe to ensure the flames don't get too big. Before lighting this fire pit, you have to ensure that there's no leaks at any of the connections. To do that, just take a spray bottle with some soap and water in it and spray each of the connections. If any bubbles come out, you know that there's a leak there, and then you have to tighten it down a little bit more to prevent any leaks. Now that we have ensured we don't have any leaks, it's time to light this thing up and see how it works. Works pretty good. Can't wait to start using this fire pit camping or wherever else a portable fire pit may be needed. If you enjoyed this video, if it helped you out, if you can like and subscribe, it will definitely help out the channel. My name is Matt. I'm just a dude. Thank you for watching.